So 200,000 have died. That came out today. I'm not even sure that number's accurate. I think it's possibly a lot more than that weren't counted. So we have a president that went out last night. His quote was literally, it affects virtually nobody. We have a conservative, I think power play is being generous. I would say a judicial coup underway, considering their hypocrisy and inconsistencies with filling the vacancy of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When you consider what looks like now it's going to happen with Mitt Romney saying he will support a nominee before the election, possibly, that could be 50 to 75 years of conservative rule, give or take, on the Supreme Court. And we also have, it hasn't been talked about, we're going on 2 months since the expiration of that unemployment of $600. So I wanted to ask you, obviously you're running against Nancy Pelosi. The action really will be in the Senate if Democrats could stop anything in terms of this nominee. But it just seems like we have no opposition party in this country. Obviously Trump is terrible. He's I think I'm removing quasi. He's a fascist. I think any competent person would have definitely, we would have had deaths. We would have had problems with coronavirus, not to this scale. But how do you defeat this if the Chuck Schumer, from what I hear, has no plan or to play hardball? Nancy Pelosi has talked about, no, we're not going to threaten a government shutdown, which to me, 8 days, by the way, till the government possibly shuts down without additional funding. So she said, no, we're not going to do that, which is a continuation of bringing a spoon to a knife fight. Yes. What is your response to me? They're meeting Republican treachery with, crickets.
The question in my mind is not whether Democrats are weak in their resistance to the coup underway or whether or not they are complicit. And it is alarming. And I want to make one, I'll get really sharp about this and then try to zoom back. Reproductive liberty is one reason that people are very concerned about the future of the Supreme Court, and they should be, because reproductive rights are the most basic, fundamental example of human autonomy. If you can't control your own body, there's no way any of us can claim to be free. And it is entirely on brand for Nancy Pelosi to duck into a punch of undermining reproductive liberty because she hasn't defended it in all the ways that she can. This very year, she endorsed Dan Lipinski in Illinois and Henry Cuellar in Texas. These are reproductive authoritarians, anti-choice Democrats. And she endorsed them over challenges by young progressive women of color who favored reproductive liberty. So what does that tell you? That suggests not weakness. That suggests something worse than that. And I'm not going to chase conspiracy theories. I don't know what Nancy Pelosi wants to happen to the court, but to show up on national television within 36 hours of Justice Ginsburg's passing saying we're going to take options off the table is inexcusable. It is a profound failure of leadership at a time when we need people to show up for work. Now, the reason, again, I say that it might be complicity is this pattern is entirely well established in Nancy Pelosi's history. It's why I am running for office to replace her, because I can't bear to see my city represented by a voice who does so much in Washington to pave Trump's path, while claiming to resist him based entirely on theatrical photo ops. Kneeling in kente cloth, pointing across a table, tearing up a speech, none of that matters. What would have mattered is maybe not signing or stumping for the military authorization that gave Trump $750 billion in the middle of a pandemic to buy weapons that we don't even need. Just to tug on that thread here, and this gets into the part of the failure of leadership, we have real national security crises confronting our country. There's a pandemic, there's a climate catastrophe that is killing Californians today. There is a threat to the republic's continuity in the form of, the tax on the post office and the ability to conduct an election by mail. Those are all real national security threats, not a single one of which the Defense Department can do anything about. So why are we hurling $750 billion at a department addressing threats that don't even rank in the top 3 at the moment? What sense does this make? That's the supposed opposition. And this, we'll just keep this rolling. Nancy Pelosi, you were talking about, do we have opposition in this country? Nancy Pelosi revived expired surveillance powers from the dead to give to Donald Trump, expanding his authority to suppress dissent within the United States. there was a crackdown by DHS goon squads in Portland and Kenosha. Democrats have been funding DHS for 17 years without a shred of oversight. I've watched all this in slow motion up close. I've worked in Washington twice as a leader, and before that as a senior staff of different civil rights organizations. And I have watched the corporate Democratic Party do everything they can to build this political moment. Fascism in America is not a recent fear for me. Many of us have seen it for decades. As a Muslim immigrant, it's been painfully obvious to me, particularly since 2001. And I've done everything I can over the last 20 years to stop it. And that included trying to stop Bush's wars and the Patriot Act. It included trying to stop Obama's deportations and drone strikes. It included challenging Trump's corruption. And it included, unfortunately, at every stage in those 20 years, having to also confront Nancy Pelosi's documented complicity. And the only reason she's been able to stay in Congress is because she raises as much money as she does, and that she's managed to duck debates for 30 years. She hasn't debated anyone since 1987.
And I assume she has not agreed to a debate with you.
She has refused ever to even acknowledge that we exist. She pretends online as if she's running against Republicans, when the first challenger she's faced, the viable challenge this year, is from her left, and she claims as if her electoral antagonists are on the right, and it's not true at all. And I think that the fact that she gets a free pass from the local media for not debating anyone in 30 years is as in much an indictment of our democratic process as the smear campaign to which I was subjected by the local press. I mean, it's alarming to me to see an election coming up in a few weeks when the electorate hasn't even had a chance to hear from the candidates. Like, how do we invade other countries to impose democracy when we can't even figure it out here to that extent? And I think that for an incumbent to go 30 years without defending their record in public, it doesn't demonstrate a disrespect for me. It demonstrates a disrespect for the city and democracy. The entitlement that it reflects is, frankly, to me, as revolting as the incumbent's legislative history.
I also want to mention, I sent you this earlier, but in addition to the Democrats giving Trump DHS, $740 billion have gone to military, just came out today that $1 billion of the CARES Act from March that went to the Pentagon, they gave the Pentagon $1 billion saying, hey, make masks and PPE equipment and preparedness for coronavirus material, in addition to creating the infrastructure for an eventual vaccine. Well, guess what? That $1 billion that went to the Pentagon for the coronavirus got redirected to basically defense contractors to make more weapons. What is your thoughts on that?
Entirely predictable, so unacceptable. I mean, my first reaction was to, not the acronym, but WTAF. And I don't understand how anybody gets away with this stuff. And it's not new. This is the kind of thing that has unfortunately been entirely well documented going back for decades. The architect of the military contracting system warned us that it would eat democracy and it would transform the spiritual character of the United States down to every city. That was Dwight Eisenhower. And I see his warnings demonstrated in a million different ways. I've written a chapter in a book about this, all the different ways in which his warning came true, from mass surveillance to tanks in the hands of local police departments to drone strikes to militarized police cracking down on dissent. Like this coup that we are witnessing has been unfolding in slow motion for at least 20 years. And if I had a nickel for every smug liberal who laughed at me while I talked about how bipartisan fascism was rising, I would be as wealthy as Nancy Pelosi. And I see, unfortunately, too many people who claim to be liberal, I'm using air quotes here, not understanding what the words mean. Like the word liberal has been so contorted in so many different ways. Like first it was demonized by the right wing in the 2000s, and now it kind of stands in for centrist. But like liberal is supposed to be people who understand liberty, right? In the 19th century, liberties were like construed against the state. That's what those are people we call libertarians. 20th century liberals came to understand that the market can be oppressive. So to be liberated from the market requires progressive social interventions. Those are liberals, but now liberals have emerged as like corporate defenders in an era when we have an entire generation having been shafted by corporate rule so viciously that socialism, for the first time in generations, is once again a majority opinion within the United States. We've never had opportunities to advance that vision electorally because our system is so skewed, from money in politics to skewed media representations. The way the Pentagon gets away with this kind of serial fraud, waste, and abuse, so many things to say here. I want to relate it back to the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which was like the grand larceny of $2.5 trillion, vastly outpacing $1 billion. Like, for a mere $1 billion to have been misdirected feels like a drop in the bucket, knowing that the Pentagon has lost track of $21 trillion over the course of the last generation, which is just mind-numbing. Like, I don't think anybody can even conceive of that amount of money. $21 trillion is staggering. And that's as much money as the Pentagon is unable to account for. Where did it go? What happened to it? What are we using it for? A lot of it's just accounting errors, but a lot of it's not. And what we're talking about here in the misdirection of these COVID funds, it's even worse because this is money that was appropriated to deal with an actual crisis, a real national security crisis. So it's not just military fraud, waste, and abuse and corruption. It's making the crisis worse by taking money away from where it actually needs to be so that it can fill somebody's pocket. And that is not okay. Congress's first job is to check and balance the executive branch, and it has failed miserably time after time. And as much as the misdirection of these COVID funds makes the point, I see it demonstrated even more starkly in the runaway funding for DHS agencies. People are, and we should be, absolutely aghast. And I just find it entirely unacceptable that we're practicing eugenics in concentration camps at our nation's border. And anybody has the gall to debate whether or not fascism is ascendant in the United States. Every Democrat who funded DHS over the last 17 years should be removed from office. There's no reason we're funding agencies that are building concentration camps to then pull tactics straight out of the Nazi playbook. That is not acceptable. I expect that from Republicans. Too many Democrats do it too. And I'm done with it. I mean, that's why I'm running for Congress, to replace the head of the party, because Nancy Pelosi funded the concentration camps. Nancy Pelosi extended Trump's surveillance powers. Nancy Pelosi approved this military budget, the likes of which the world has never seen. Why is Donald Trump wielding the biggest checks for a military establishment that our planet and species have ever seen in the middle of a pandemic of all times? I mean, it's so grotesque. It amazes me that people go to work under a system like this and consent. We talk about living in a land of the free and a home of the brave. Those shoes fit increasingly poorly, as far as I can tell.
We should also point out that these same Democrats have been voting overwhelmingly to confirm district and non-Supreme Court judges all over the country. Yes. McConnell is... They're creating the Democrats are handing conservatives across the country a huge, just generational advantage on the courts all over the country.
Not about Ginsburg, but looking back, because you're raising a super important point that a lot of people on the left forget. And I have a particular interest in this. I worked for 3 years on the senior staff of the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy. ACS was founded in the wake of the Bush versus Gore decision to try to counter the influence of the Federalist Society, which since the 1970s has basically captured our federal courts and closed them as an avenue for justice. The courts are a crucial part of the constitutional design. Taking them off the table as a way for people to get relief when institutions like government agencies and corporations abuse us and our communities is a critical part of the right-wing project. Justice Lewis Powell laid out that strategy in an infamous memo where he basically forecast the centrality of the courts to promoting political perspectives. What Democrats, I've watched this for the better part of 20 years. I've spent 3 years helping prepare a pipeline of potential appointees for the next Democratic president. And I'm so disappointed in so many different ways in the legacy of the Obama administration. But one of the ones that I think he doesn't get enough blame for, and yes, there's the drone strikes, yes, the deportations, yes, the crackdown on the press, yes, failing to show up for working people, prepping the landscape for Trump. And I don't want to beat up on the Obama administration because he's frankly still probably I hate to say it, but the best president in my lifetime. The thing here that I'm particularly alarmed by is the judges, because when President Obama had the appointing authority as a constitutional law professor who understood what was at stake more than anybody, he appointed prosecutors of color and called it a day. And that pipeline of progressive jurists that we prepared, one of them got nominated for a circuit court appointment. He didn't get confirmed, and the administration left him twisting in the wind. He ended up getting appointed to the California State Supreme Court, where he has an opportunity to advance the jurisprudence in a different arena. But this idea that Democrats have abdicated and conceded the judiciary long before now, this goes back into the Clinton era. Democrats, it's been 40 years since there was a president actively appointing actual progressive or liberal judges. Even when we've had Democratic presidents, they've still appointed prosecutors and corporate lawyers. They've just made sure that they were a diverse set of prosecutors and corporate lawyers, and the tokenization of representation and the tokenization of identity and the needs of our communities that have frankly been weaponized by a bipartisan establishment against us is a big part of the problem. And it's infected the judiciary in a way that's already, long before the Senate allowed Trump in the last 4 years to reshape the judiciary in his ideological image. Something like a third of the judges have been appointed by this criminal president. Think about that for a second. The judges, the people we're supposed to go to when the government or corporations run roughshod over our rights, were appointed by this maniac with the consent of Democratic senators. What is the point of voting for Democrats when they pave the road for the right wing? And that's why I'm running against Pelosi, because there really is not any good answer to that question. And I'm tired of seeing the American people fleeced by people who are claiming to stand with us, especially knowing that there are so many people who are just overt in their predation. We need people to actually resist fascism. And if there's anything I know, it's how to do that. I'm a Muslim immigrant in the United States. I was in law school when 9/11 happened and the unfolding set of horrors that Paul Krugman, downplayed very prolifically recently. I mean, what my community's been subjected to, we're like canaries in a coal mine. And I've seen this coming for 20 years. And I've done everything I can to stop it, while Nancy Pelosi has unfortunately accelerated this crisis at every opportunity. And our city deserves better. Our country deserves better. The future deserves better. And I'm eager to do everything I can to get out of the position of saying yet again, I told you so, and hopefully helping us step over some of these predictable pitfalls into which the establishment keeps dragging.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com, where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.